Our next guest is a government grants funding expert who has helped deliver $150 million or more to Australian businesses. Kate Whitehead is here to help us understand the most lucrative government funding opportunities for business right now and how to try and maximise the chances of winning a grant. Thank you so much for your time.
Morning, how are you, Aaron?
I'm doing really well. Thank you for standing by. Talk to us about what businesses should be looking at the moment. A lot of people are learning about dealing with governments because of JobKeeper and stuff like that too. But there must be this sense from a lot of businesses that getting a government grant is just a waste of time. What's your view on that?
Oh, absolutely no. Businesses should definitely be investigating the opportunities to get government grants and funding. At the moment, because of the reaction to the COVID issue that we're all faced with, there's a lot of stimulus that's going in that area. And we've all seen things like the JobKeeper payments and whatnot. But then there are also a range of government grants that are available to organisations to help them fund their business. So, for example, across all of the states, generally each state, if you're an organisation that is structured appropriately and you employ staff, you'll be eligible for a $10,000 cash payment to assist you if you've been negatively impacted by COVID. On top of that, there are a lot of funding opportunities to help you continue to grow your business, even whilst the economy tends to be in a state of distress at the moment. For example, the Export Market Development Grant is one that we see businesses still actively claiming. So funding's there to help stimulate, and by no means should you be saying that you shouldn't bother looking at them, because by all means you'd be missing out on opportunities by having that sort of attitude towards them.
Very good point about the attitude change that we need to have on that. I guess a lot of people look at it and they don't know where to start. There are state grants, there are grants that come from the federal government, there are grants that come from departments of federal government, there are grants that come from organisations that are run by government, there are grants run from councils as well. It can be an absolute minefield to understand the language that's being used, to understand what you're eligible for. What are some tips that you have in terms of helping people through that process?
Yeah, look, and it's a good point, because unfortunately it is quite fragmented, all the data that's available in the marketplace, and it's hard to keep abreast of what's open and what you might be eligible for. Generally, there are three types of government grants or funds. So the first type is a competitive style grant, and that's where there's a pool of funding that opens and closes throughout the year. The government identifies merit criterion and organisations that are eligible to apply, and the types of projects that they're looking to fund in those sorts of examples. So if you wanted to apply for a competitive grant, that means obviously you're competing against a pool of other applicants in a particular round. So you may or may not get the funding, but understanding the merit criterion and how closely your business or project aligns to that grant is quite important. The next area is entitlement-based programs. So that's where if you're structured appropriately and you undertake activity of a certain style or nature that meets the grant guidelines, you will get the money. So that's the area that's obviously the easiest to apply for, and you really don't want to miss out on specific grants in that space. So the places that you can look for information include heading over to the Austrade website and keeping abreast of Oz industry. You can sign up for newsletters and alerts on those particular sites. But then on top of that, it's always easy to talk to a grants consulting firm that can help you or navigate through those particular options. And then the third space is government lending or loan schemes. So there's a government division called Export Finance Australia. They provide loans for organisations that are trying to export and grow their business into overseas markets. So there's plenty of opportunities out there. It can be quite difficult keeping abreast of them all, but signing up to the newsletters across those sites and talking to grant consultants usually will help you.
And the Export Market Development Grant as well, in particular, just give us some thoughts on that, because right now governments are really wanting to get businesses out, particularly exporting, so important for us to bring back some of that foreign money which has been lost through all this as well.
Absolutely. Now, the EMDG, or Export Market Development Grant, that's a program that's been running for over 30 years. And this particular grant enables an organisation that is either exporting a service or a product into overseas markets, excluding New Zealand and North Korea. So anywhere else in the world, if you're attempting to export, you're entitled to up to $1.2 million in funding over 8 grants. The sorts of things that it'll cover the costs include things like travel. So unfortunately, we're not doing much of that at the moment for obvious reasons. But that doesn't mean you can't stop continuing to use other channels, so digital marketing, Google AdWords, those sorts of things. anything that's export promotional in nature, this grant will help defray the costs of those endeavours of an organisation. So definitely one worth investigating. As I said, if you're an Australian organisation looking to export a service or a product, then 9 times out of 10 you'll be eligible for that grant.
And I guess when it comes to doing a lot of the applications, which can take time, etc., I found that some of the best tips are to think about it from the government's perspective as opposed to your own business's perspective, for example, as a way to begin and work back from, because a lot of businesses might go, you beauty, you know, $500,000 or 1.2 million, I could do this, this and this. But quite often the this and this that you want to do is not what the government wants you to be doing with that money at all. A little bit like how when you bring in investors to your business, they don't want you to be spending the money on marketing or to be spending the money on paying your staff. They want you to be growing the business, which is the whole point. Give us some tips as to the mindset that you need to be in when you're actually applying for these grants.
Yeah, look, it's a really good point because the grants actually do lead you around what it is that they're looking to fund. So in any competitive grant application, they publish the merit criterion and they actually identify a percentage weighting against each of those criterion that they'll be assessing your application against. So many times we see people apply for grants and they're not actually answering the questions that the grant's asking you to do. The government grants are always about stimulus and growth, as you mentioned. Yeah. So things like capital investment for leading edge technologies, things that will enable new jobs creation, for example, growth into overseas markets. They're the sorts of things that the government wants to see. They don't want to fund business as usual. They look at that as the businesses, that's their responsibility as an organisation. The government's about backing organisations to help them grow. So, you know, responding to that specifically when you are responding to a competitive grants application is quite important.
Yeah, it is a really good point, and also making sure that it is about growth, because if you're going for that government grant for 1 year, well, what's going to happen in the second year, right? It's like you can't keep going for it because it might just be a one-off. You want to make sure that in the grant that anything you're suggesting you'll do with the money will be able to lift off and take off and pay for itself after, that it's more of kind of a cash injection to help you out to carry on in terms of that growth, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So it's all about sustainability of the business. So the government will fund projects that have, you know, sustainability and growth opportunity in future. They don't want to fund something that only has a 12-month run and then all of a sudden there'll be no sustainability in that project or that plan down the track. So making sure that when you are submitting a grant application, you undertake full financial analysis and modelling is quite important to demonstrate that there's longevity in the project in future years. That will certainly help with the assessment process from the government's perspective. There's also an element of a need for funding as well. So an organisation that has a very strong balance sheet, you know, high levels of cash in bank, has, you know, is extremely profitable over previous years and is then going to the government asking for a relatively small grant, generally won't get funded because really you don't need the money. It's the organisations that will have can demonstrate a need that are the ones that are more likely to get funding.
So just give us some ideas of the most common mistakes that you see businesses when they're trying to apply for these grants.
So it sounds really simple, but the biggest one's actually eligibility. So the grants, they identify the nature of the organisational structure. They talk about, you know, the sorts of operations that you must be doing in the business sector that you must be operating in. A lot of people look at a grant and, as you mentioned before, you know, they see the big dollar sign and they think, oh, this is great, let's go for it. But realistically, it's got to be a square peg in a square hole. You have to fit beautifully
so true.
With the
I once had someone send me an idea for a grant that Tika could go for, which was a government grant to try and encourage Hollywood directors to film movies on the Gold Coast. And and I'm thinking, I'm a TV network here.
You might be good at that.
You never know. I'm thinking here I am running a TV network out of Richmond in Melbourne, and you know, I mean, we could get into Hollywood productions at some stage, some special effects, but you're exactly right about the eligibility, and don't waste your time if you are a round peg in a square hole.
There's too much time and effort that goes into a competitive grant. You know, we're a firm and we do them all day, every day. And on average, we would book about 80 to 100 hours on a competitive grant write-up. So that gives you an idea of how much work goes into these things. So from the outset, it's a bit heartbreaking for me where I have to tell people, look, I just don't think you're a good fit for this particular grant.
Oh, come on, be honest. You must have a laugh where you're kind of looking at it and going, how do they think they're going to be? How does Aaron think he's going to be running a multi-billion-dollar Hollywood production out of his Richmond office? I mean, you must get some absolute doozies. I reckon there's a whole show that we could start about people who apply for grants that don't quite work and have it as a good Australian comedy to which we could apply for a grant. How can we get in touch with you out of interest if we want to find out more about what you guys are doing?
Yeah, absolutely. Please feel free to visit us at our website, avantgroup.com.au, and we've got an inquiry form there. So you're more than welcome to send an inquiry through, and one of our team members will contact you, talk to you about eligibility, ask you about your projects, and see if there's anything we can help you with.
And promise that we won't put you on a TV show if you come up with a hilarious thing, but don't waste everyone's time, as I like to say. Kate Whitehead, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.